I'm Rachel Horgan. Join me each episode as I sit down with a guest co-host covering the latest business stories in the Seattle area. We'll read the news so you don't have to. This is The Weekly. All right, welcome everybody. I took a break last week. I'm trying to let myself do that a little bit more, but I was working a program in San Diego. Carlsbad, to be specific, and many of you know I used to live there. So I worked the program. It was for a very large AI company, which is funny because sometimes I talk shit about AI companies, but now that they're paying me, I love them. So I did that, and then I stayed the weekend with a friend in San Diego, and it's like 88 degrees there. So it was tough to come back to this, but that was fun. The team was really talented. It was one of those things where it's just on site. I had no pre-planning, just came on board and figured it out. So that's that. And then last night I taught a class at Seattle University, Professor Horgan here. It was about producing podcasts. So it was a small group, and it was meant to be that way because it's just a couple-hour workshop. And it had some students, some faculty members, and I walked them through like creating their own podcast. And then they have a studio there, and we did kind of some fake episodes. So that was really fun. Okay, that's me. Enough about that. I'm sitting here in the Wells Fargo office because I'm with Mary Knell. She's the vice chair of Wells Fargo Commercial Banking and the former CEO. Hello, Mary.
Hello, Rachel.
Good to see you. We've crossed paths quite a bit, I think, in the PSBJ days. I think you were a woman of influence and you spoke at some of our events and all the things. So it's good to see you in person again. Yeah. So a little bit about you. Mary has over 40 years of financial services experience. She's a community leader in Washington, serving on the Washington CEO Roundtable Board, the Greater Seattle Partners Executive Board. She's co-president of the IWF, which is the International Women's Forum. And she's on the board of the Museum Flight and part of the Asian Hall of Fame. She graduated from, this is just to name a few, and she graduated from University of Washington, so a Husky here, and as well as the Pacific Coast Banking School. You've done a lot, and you're Seattle. Are you Seattle native?
Yes, I am.
Yeah,
Proud.
Yes, very cool. So I looked at your LinkedIn, and you have a long history of being in the banking industry. What about it excited you, or was it just kind of that was the job you got, and then you became excited about it?
Yeah, so I started in the banking industry because I took advantage of a program that was offered through the City of Seattle Summer Youth Job Program.
Okay.
And I started as a teller when I was barely in high school, and then continued. And that allowed me to work part-time after school, through high school, through college, on the weekend. I mean, not on the weekends, after school, and then during holidays and during the summer. And that was a tremendous opportunity for me to not only work with a great job, but I didn't have to work weekends and I didn't have to work evenings. So, but when I was applying for a permanent job in my junior year from the business school, somebody said, "Oh, you should apply for the credit management training program at the local bank." And it never occurred to me because I thought I'm trying to get a real job.
Right.
Outside of my part-time job. And anyway, I was really excited to be accepted into the training program. And the goal is become credit trained and then become a relationship manager. So that's how it continued in my career in banking. And so that was, 45 years ago, really. So that's been really fun. And of course, back then it was pre-internet. We used typewriters and adding machines, and, if you were really advanced, you could print things. So, we've come a long way since then, but the core of being in the banking industry has stayed pretty much the same. And it's really about understanding risk and all forms of risk, building trust, earning trust, and, about the judgment that you make in making decisions. So the best part of it and what's kept me involved is that you're helping clients with their most strategic and, life-changing moments, the decisions that they have to make. So that's been super rewarding from that standpoint.
Absolutely. My toxic trait is that if I was a teller, I think I'd look at everybody's bank account.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I'd look at my friends.
How much money?
I'd look at everybody like, how much money do you have? I did that at a fundraiser, not their bank account, but at a fundraiser, there's people raising paddles for like $100,000, like no big deal. And I looked at the reg list and I'm like, what do you do that's making you raise this paddle for no big deal? So did you know that, like, you were climbing the ladder a little bit and you wanted to be a relationship manager? Was the goal of CEO or this top leadership position, was that always on your mind, or is that something that kind of grew later?
It grew later. It never was. I loved working with clients directly. I loved helping them make decisions. And honestly, I still have a lot of relationships with people that I started working with 30 years ago. You're part of their family. They invite you to all their milestone events. And I consider myself really privileged to be able to have worked with so many longstanding family-owned companies that we have throughout the Pacific Northwest. And so I was very happy doing that. And then somebody said, have you ever thought about leading a team or managing a bigger group or starting an initiative? And life, lots of things are happening in life and a lot of responsibilities. And so I made that first move and then it just grew from there. Yeah. So anyway.
Do you miss, because this comes up in law firms too, is as you grow, you stop working on cases and you start being like the head of the law firm. And that happens with a lot of leadership positions. Do you miss kind of being that day-to-day stuff sometimes, or do you feel like this is kind of more of where you want to be right now, as more of a leadership role?
Well, anytime I'm in front of our clients and our prospects and working with our teams, that's exactly what I love to do. Yeah. The day-to-day doesn't, that's all part of the day-to-day and being involved in helping, drive the process. But I don't need to be involved in how it gets done. Yeah. I just help with making sure it happens. And I want, us to win. And so that's a great feeling when you can be involved there.
I agree. Do I miss stuffing name badges? No. That's how I feel. Okay, so the 4 stories we're going to talk about is kind of, the first one's just kind of inside the banking industry. We'll talk to Mary about what's been happening, what trends are changing. And then we'll talk about downtown office values declining. Our third story will be about Blazing Bagels is closing all their locations after 25 years. And the last story is about some news on the Sonics expansion vote. So, Mary, let's get into it. The first one doesn't have a specific article linked to it. I just wanted to hear from you a little bit about what's going on in this industry. But before we do that, explain to the average person listening, when a lot of people think about banks, they think about their own credit card and their own spending. You specialize in commercial banking. Can you explain a little bit more about what that means to everybody?
Right. So commercial banking means supporting businesses. And then we have consumer and retail banking that is serving our individual clients. So that's really the difference.
Okay. Small businesses, big businesses.
Small business all the way up, and really to bring the entire platform of what we offer. And so for our commercial banking clients, we obviously want to help them individually, which we do, but we also want to help their businesses grow and expand. And, and that includes whether they transition it to the next generation, or they sell their business, or they're making decisions about buying companies or expanding into new markets. That's what we work with those businesses.
Okay. Yeah. Good to know. So overall, what's kind of been one of the biggest shifts you've seen in the banking industry over the years? An obvious one is kind of how we don't go in person to bank anymore. Mm-hmm. But I'm curious your thoughts.
Well, there are a lot of ways to access the bank. And so branches are one method, brick and mortar, but there are also mobile ways, whether it's on your phone or the ATM or digitally, right? And so, that's convenience for what our clients need and how they work with us, whether it's to move money around or they want access to information. I would say the biggest shift has been the use of all the tools that we have available to us. So we have technology and how do we do things, and we have access to data and information. And, how do we use that to help clients with making their financial decisions? So those are additional. Banks have expanded. They grow in markets. They come into new markets when they see that there's opportunity. All of that continues. But you have to be able to make investments in continuing to scale, as well as the technology that's required. I mean, those are pretty costly. The things that haven't changed are the fundamental reasons why banks have, relationships are continued to be so important. The trust that you have with who you're working with, all of those things are, still critical, and the judgment that you make on who you're doing business with. So all of those things continue to be really important.
Yeah, definitely. I want to hear from you. What's the hot topic that customers are talking to you about? And we were talking a little bit earlier about how fraud kind of often comes up. So you can talk to me about what those conversations are like.
Yeah, well, everything in our world continues to rapidly evolve and change. So there's definitely lots to talk about there. But some of the hot topics and the areas that have a lot of attention, and it's not just recent, but but it just continues to happen even more so. It has to do with fraud and cybersecurity. There isn't a day that goes by that we're not speaking to one of our clients about something that's happened to them. And that's not about market risk or credit risk. It's really operational risk. So like, for example, we worked with a company that was involved with closing one of their biggest deals in their history. And so it was a lot of money. It was tight timelines, lots of pressure to execute flawlessly. And of course, everybody's on high alert, right, to meet timing deadlines. And so the CFO of that company received an email that appeared to come from the CEO. And it was referencing the deal. It matched the tone of what was being discussed. It even included language that they pulled directly from the conversations that were occurring. The request was very simple: urgently wire funds to a new account to complete the transaction. And so everything about it felt like it was
right.
Like
it's not one. I mean, I got one that was like go to Target and buy a gift card.
Yeah.
I was super young and I didn't do it, but I did reply. This one is much more sophisticated than that.
Right. And so, what they didn't know was that it was not from the CEO. It was created from a fraudster who had already been in their computer system monitoring what had been going on. And so within minutes, millions of dollars had been wired out of the funds. And so the money was gone. And the hardest part was that by the time anybody realized it, of course, the money had moved through multiple bank accounts and it was not recoverable. So when you stand back and you sit down, and sitting down with the leadership team of this company, that was very sobering, right? It wasn't because the controls didn't exist, but because nobody anticipated or were aware of the sophistication of what was going on. So the CEO said, we didn't lose money because we weren't smart. It was because it looked exactly like we do business. Mm-hmm. And so fraud doesn't come in looking suspicious. I mean, there's that kind of fraud too, right? Where they're altering and you see that happening. It looks familiarly urgent, routine. So fraud doesn't look like the fraud. It really looks like business as usual.
Yeah.
So that's a huge topic, and we work with clients to make sure that they understand that the controls that we relied upon in the past, or that it's always the bank's responsibility, or people are reviewing all the details, that's no longer enough. And so now, you have to do layered verification. You have to have dual controls. You have to make sure that phone calls occur and that it's part of your culture. And exactly when there's a lot of pressure to hurry up and do something, make sure you slow down and think about what's happening, because it is telling you, just to think and make sure that you don't get yourself into a situation where you can't protect your company because, you're not using the right methods and the right tools to detect fraudsters and prevent it from happening. So dual approvals, making sure that they do callback verification, watching what's happening in your account so that it can be acted upon very quickly, segregation of duties, all of these things, and making sure that your systems are protected from any kind of situation for cybersecurity.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that whole alert of, this could be fraud, say yes or no, reply 1 or 2 if this is actually you. That's a relatively recent thing that the banks have done. And I don't know if that's shifted people's mindsets to be like, the bank should catch this, where it's like the bank's doing everything they can, but there's only so much, there's a responsibility on the individual person to look out for these things too, because like you said, they're getting so sophisticated. So
there's no way to know. It's always click here, and then what happens, from that, right? It's not a easy way. You don't really know whether it's real or
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah, I can see how that's a big, I mean, especially with AI and like the videos and like they can mimic the tone of somebody's voice. I think it's a really good reminder for both business owners and individuals to keep an eye out on that. Yeah.
Good.
Last question on this. Is there anything else this might be your answer of fraud, but is there anything else you wish the average person understood about banks? And part of where I was thinking about this is sometimes I think banks can get a bad rap. We had like the housing crisis, you have the Silicon Valley Bank situation, but what would you say kind of back to that of like what you wish people understood a little bit more about banks and banking?
Yeah, so banks play a key role because we help support financial needs of individuals and their businesses. And so what I would say is that remaining disciplined and what that means in how you provide, who you're working with, and what type of solutions you're providing, all of those things are really foundational to what we do in commercial banking, because you need to make sure that it's the right solution for the client or the situation. And we're providing tailored advice. It's not just a generic, standard. And that's why working with commercial clients and customers, it's all unique, and making sure that we are adding value. And so this is a great market. Commercial banking is fantastic because you're supporting businesses that are creating jobs, and those companies have needs, and you help them along the way from how they get started into what ultimately happens to the business. And so that's a really fantastic, very rewarding part of the reason why I've been in banking. And here at our bank, Wells Fargo, we've been hiring additional bankers. We've been investing in talent and expanding. And that's because, we have opportunities to continue to grow. So that's always
good to hear. I feel like the tech layoffs are making the headlines. So I'm glad that there's an industry that's hiring. That's good.
Well, and even in a digital type environment, we still need people that can, build relationships with people, right? Totally. That trust is super important. Yeah. So I see that as a key differentiator, and as uncertain as times become, it'll be even more valued relationships. And I think that's important things. There are some things that you can do comfortably online. You never have to talk to anybody. And then when you're making a decision or you need advice or you need to talk in more detail, that's when you want to sit down with somebody and have somebody understand who you are.
I think about that with my financial planner. I was talking to somebody, they're like, oh, I do it myself, and I maybe they use AI and whatever. And in my mind, that's great for them. But for me, just because you can doesn't mean you should. For me, like I probably could figure it out, but I don't think I should. I think that's something I want to have my financial planner think about. So similar to banks of like, there's some stuff you can research on your own and maybe that works for you, but there is still that value of somebody understanding your business. And I'm sure you've seen small businesses in Seattle grow. Yeah. And that's probably going to be rewarding, like you said. Well, cool. Okay, we're going to move on to our next article, which is about downtown office values declining. But it's not all doom and gloom. So we talked to John Scholes a couple weeks ago on the show about downtown Seattle, and we know that foot traffic is up, crime is down, retail shops are filling empty spaces, things are going really well. We've got a record number of people coming downtown for FIFA in 2026. But there's this little part of office vacancy. It's at a record 32%, and the value of buildings has been dropping. It dropped 58% in the past few years. We've known this. I don't think this is a big surprise to people. I do want to reference, people might be like, well, why do I care if there's empty offices? And to try and think downstream that affects the city's revenue, right? So that's going to be less property taxes, less taxes from those businesses that aren't in downtown. And then that's going to shift the burden to the homeowner and to maybe the small business renting space. So it does eventually trickle down if you're listening to this and you're thinking like, why do I care if an office building is empty, right? One of John Scholes' quotes that I liked said, "We don't need more business taxes in Seattle. We need more businesses in Seattle paying taxes." So he's basically saying like, we're making progress, and tourism's great. We've got these apartment units, but we got to figure out this tax situation. The last thing I'll say is another quote. He said, in total, over the last 3 years or so, there's $1 billion in new taxes that employers based in the city of Seattle are paying that they weren't paying 5 years ago, and they're not paying in Bellevue and other parts of the region. So a really interesting article. I'll link it in the show notes, kind of talking about what's going on in downtown, the mix of taxes and the empty office buildings. So like I said, the vacancy is high. Walk us through what that actually means for a bank like Wells Fargo who's lending. So how does that impact your world?
So when we think about commercial banking and supporting businesses. I mean, there are business cycles that are going to happen. We go through supply and contraction, right? That is, you can see those graphs over the history. The key is to be consistent and to try to make sure that you're supporting businesses regardless of the economic cycles. And that's something that we're very proud of, because you want to be here sustainability, but also to help support the life cycle of businesses. So that means you need to be disciplined in underwriting. And that means you have to understand the cash flows that are paying the repayment of debt. And you have to monitor collateral values and the performance of leases and what's happening in the marketplace. And you have to look at the sponsor and their ability to help support the property if there is any kind of a hiccup that is occurring. So, buildings that are in strong locations, that have amenities, that there have tenants that are there and continue to, those ones are performing better than some that are not current, right? And location matters. And so the quality of the property also is a major factor there.
I was going to ask if like those buildings that have the amenities and the gym and the coffee shop, if those are truly making a shift and people are choosing those still.
I think so. Yeah. I think as a tenant, you want your employees to have access to these amenities. And I think it's a big draw. And so it also matters where you're located. Do people feel safe? How easy is it to get to? Do you have parking? I mean, all these things, you want people to come back in the office, let's make it easy for them to feel that way.
When you're because I'm thinking about how there's some new stuff going on in Pioneer Square that's a little more like artsy, and there's obviously we're trying to recover Third Avenue. Does Wells Fargo take that into consideration, or any bank, I guess, when lending to specific areas that maybe would you discount it or give a better deal because you want to improve that area, or is that kind of not really something you would?
Yeah, the underwriting criteria doesn't really factor that in. There may be other types of financing to help support development, economic development, or depending on the district or the source of funding. But we're all interested in ensuring that we have a strong, downtown corridor. But if there are specific programs that are available, we want to offer those. But it's not geographic at this point. Yeah.
So speaking of downtown, this is maybe more so in your community leadership brain side, because I know, we're downtown right now. I know you're heavily involved in it. What do you personally think needs to happen to kind of with our downtown? Any thoughts?
Yeah. So, downtown, like other downtown, our city is resetting. We've experienced a lot in the last 6 years. We are showing, as you've mentioned, positive trends. We've got more tourists coming here. We've got, growth that's occurring. We have more events to attract visitors. And we're working on diversifying our economy here at downtown. And so it's not just the office workers that need to help with supporting the retail, the hospitality environment, housing. We need more companies bringing their employees back to downtown Seattle on a consistent basis. And we need to, as we talked about, they may have more flexible needs that they're looking for. So I really think it's, have we hit bottom? We may not have. Is it worse in other cities? We're trying to learn from that and apply some, what can we do to help make sure that this continues to be a vibrant city for...
Yeah. To your point, I mean, this is a downtown issue for a lot of cities in the U.S. It's not specific to Seattle. And I wonder if it's just the level set is going to be different. We can't compare to what was, because we're just not in that world anymore.
That's right.
Similar to how payphones aren't a thing anymore. So I'm curious to see what will happen. But I appreciate your take on that. We're going to move to our third story, which is about Blazing Bagels. Fun fact, not my first job, but one of my jobs early on was working at a bagel shop. It's called the Daily Bagel in Eugene, Oregon. So I'm very passionate about my bagels. And I'm really sad about this one. So after almost 25 years in business, Blazing Bagels has flamed out, said Seattle Times. They love a little pun there. They've closed 5 of its retail stores after they already closed their wholesale business in December, which means, I don't know if you guys maybe been to PCC, you'll see kind of the bag of Blazing Bagels. That's what they mean by closing their wholesale business. They did that last year. It is family owned and operated, and it launched in Redmond in 2001. The founder is Dennis Balin. He stepped aside as CEO in 2025, and his daughters took it over. And they said that the daughters had already been doing a lot of work behind the scenes. That part it sucks, because I'm sure that they've been struggling, and then they pass it to the daughters, and the daughters have to go through, the closing of the stores. That's got to be so hard for them. But I bring this article in to talk about small businesses specifically. What's kind of your overall read on how small businesses are doing based on your interactions with them in the bank?
Yeah, so the environment is, I would say, mixed. Resilient in some cases overall, but there's definitely real pressure occurring, especially in food and in retail. And the biggest reason is that the costs continue to rise faster than the revenue. So we have one of the highest minimum wages in the country. Insurance keeps going up. Labor costs are high for operators. And not to mention rising rents and, lease costs, food costs, supply chain costs. So the margins for small business have been under pressure. And it doesn't take very much of an increase for it to wipe out what profits there are. So, we're all still adjusting, I would say. And that may mean, the foot traffic, but also downtown versus neighborhood spots, right, where there is more happening. Consumer behaviors have also shifted. So people are making different choices. So I'm really sad to see a family business and one that has operated and has great bagels, close. And I'm not close to what happened there, but I can only guess that it is because the model that they have, it just doesn't work at these cost levels. So, somebody else may have a different platform in that location. They may offer with a different offering, different pricings, different staffing models. Right.
Like, yeah, who knows?
And so, larger companies can absorb higher costs.
Right.
And so for single operations, they've got a lot of things that they have to deal with.
Yeah, I think it's just super validating for you to kind of acknowledge this, because I'm hearing from some of my friends are small business owners, and I have a couple friends that own a restaurant, and I'm hearing from them this story, and I think it's validating to hear from your side, where you are seeing this financially from a lot of small businesses, that they're not crazy. This is expensive, and what you're doing is really hard. So that being said, if we do have some small business owners listening, what advice would you give them, kind of maybe from a financial perspective or otherwise?
Well, this is still an attractive market, as you've said, but it is definitely harder. So if you're opening a new business, just make sure that you think through, and what I mean by how you're capitalized. Are you using leverage? Are you borrowing money that needs to cover your revenues have to cover your expenses? Probably not having a lot of leverage, it would be a good thing, because then you have some more flexibility in allowing the revenues to cover the cost, and that your costs are as low as possible.
So borrow less? Is that what?
Borrow less.
Okay.
Have access to liquidity, because stuff will happen that you have no idea will have happened, so that you can, pull different levers to help you through. It could be a seasonal, it could be something
Pipe burst
that you had no idea that would happen. I would also think about, how do you be most efficient in how you're operating, and that could be digitally. We go into places now where everything's self-service, right? You don't even need to have, you pay by card and you make your order. And so that helps on labor costs. Anything you can do to keep your costs down is really, really important. And you have to be relevant, right? You have to have a product that people want to enjoy. And, and I think, every time I talk to a business owner, they will say to me, I really want to be able to sleep at night. I don't want to be worrying about what's tomorrow going to be like. How can I get to a point where I can have that assurance? And part of it is how you start a business, and then making sure that you continue to adapt to whatever the situation is in terms of consumer trends happening in the neighborhood and how you operate your business.
Yeah, I think that's incredible advice. And I just went to a food truck, and they have a iPad where you order from the iPad instead of going up to the person and then they call it out. So I'm going to start seeing more of that, I'm sure. The last question on this is a little bit more about brick and mortar, just because Blazing Bagels had those 5 locations. And I mentioned it at the top of the show, but where do you see the future of brick and mortar? Because my parents just recently said they stopped going into the bank to deposit checks, and they've just now started using their phone. And I've obviously been using my phone a lot. And I think the big reason to go in is for those bigger conversations, right? Like if you're going to buy a home and you need those big loans. Where do you see brick and mortar going?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what's happened. When you need to have a conversation with someone and you want to be able to interact. And, our branch platform is about deepening relationships. We want to have the opportunity to sit down, understand what clients' objectives are, and spend the time talking through it. You have to also, a lot of people are coming into the branch because they need to talk about these major purchases, or they need a plan towards their retirement. So, as I said, that branches are just one of the ways that we serve clients.
Yeah.
And we look for other ways that, like you said, they don't need to stand in line to deposit a check. They can do it on their app, right?
Yeah.
Or if they need to go in and they need their cash, a certain denomination, most of that, I see that at the teller line. They want, they want access to something that they can't do through the machine. So, but it's always about where the branch is located. How do we optimize? Is that based on, geographically, because is a new development? Is it because there isn't, foot traffic in an area? So we're adjusting where our branches are located, but we want to be where customers are. So we'll be doing that, and that could include opening new branches as well as relocating branches.
Okay. Good. You're hinting at something, Mary. I wonder if we're going to pendulum swing a little bit. I had to submit this request. There was an issue with my apartment I rent, and it was all AI. And I think it was trying to make it easier, but I would type in, hey, my buzzer's broken. It was like, did you mean your alarm system? I was like, no. And I was like, if I could just talk to a person. So I think might be some people that are getting frustrated with some of the tech and AI, if it's not working for them, that they might want to go into Wells Fargo and talk to somebody. I know I would. The other thing I was going to say is that you bring up a good point about denominations. I used to go in to get quarters because my laundry was quarters. And do you remember the quarter shortage?
Yeah.
I went in, I was like, I'll have like 3 or 4 rolls. Like, we can only give you 1. I was like, what do you mean? This is where the quarters live. Like, what do you mean? And then I was like, just make more. I know that's not how that works, but I was like, I came to the bank for quarters. What do you mean you don't have them? Okay. I don't have quarter laundry anymore, thankfully. Okay, we're going to move on to our last story. And this was suggested by your team. I hear that you're passionate about the Sonics, and there was a story that came out recently about this. So basically, the league owners are expected to vote to enter the official expansion process specific to Seattle and Las Vegas. It needs approval from 23 of the 30 owners. I talked about this on one of my episodes where it just feels very... It's funny to me that this is how the sports world works. I don't track this business of sports that much. But when my friend told me, like, yeah, all the owners have to vote and decide if somebody, I'm like, that sounds like Mean Girls. We're like, I don't know if we can expand it to 1 more person. We have to vote ourselves, which is so silly to me. But that's how it works. So they need 23 of the 30 owners to approve it. And this approval just means that they're going to start the process. From the article, it sounds like it's a really long process, but this is kind of the first step, right? If it is approved, this could happen this year to add these 2 teams, which would mean the season would be the following year. Kraken ownership group has expressed interest in being involved in the conversation. And fun facts here, it's been more than 20 years since the NBA last expanded. I thought that's a long time. And the expansion fee could range from $7 billion to $10 billion. So we're talking about a good chunk of change here. So like I said, you're personally passionate about the Sonics. Why is that? What's the story there? Just like it?
Well, I'm Seattle born and raised, and I'm really so proud of our city and showcasing it anytime we can. So the revival of the Sonics coming back to Seattle is a big deal. It's a huge civic moment for our city and a big part of our identity. It's about our city connecting what was unfortunate that it left us abruptly back then, and it should have never left. So I think for me, it's about the belonging and the nostalgia that it reconnects our past, but also a big part of our community in the future. So you're right. It's going to happen. I feel very excited about the opportunity, and we've got such a great place for it. The arena,
absolutely,
is ready to go.
Yeah, I hear it a lot. I moved here about 10 years ago, and I think anybody that's been here when the Sonics were here are very passionate about bringing them back. But I agree with you in the camaraderie. I was wearing a PWHL Torrent sweatshirt and just out on the street, somebody was like, I like your shirt, and it happens often. And so I agree. I also don't think that there's, some people are like, well, we already have too many teams? Like, is it going to hurt the Storm's attendance? And I kind of just don't agree with that personally, based on no data, but my head. I think there's enough people to go to all these games, I think.
Totally agree.
So, okay, beyond personal feelings, what do you think the economic impact of an NBA franchise returning would be? What's your take on kind of that impact?
Well, when we see games that are happening at Climate Pledge, we know that obviously the area, whether that's for Seattle Kraken or for Storm games or Torrent games, that the area benefits from restaurants, bars, hospitality, right? So that is a positive. It's a powerful cultural and also a benefit to the local businesses in the area. Concerts is another thing that's happening. So the NBA would add more utilization to the arena, which would be a positive for those business. I think it would boost downtown significantly. People they stay here downtown, they spend time before the games, and Seattle Center, our nightlife, creating jobs, attracting more businesses, real economic activity. So I think that's a real positive thing. Also, the civic pride that this brings to our community. That's, families that come together. Like you said, people go to different sporting events for different reasons and they rally behind their team.
They do.
I think it would be a positive, really, really positive thing for us. So
I agree.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. Well, anything else you want to say about anything we've talked about today, banking or anything you want the audience to know before I do my closing question?
I think we're really well positioned for a professional basketball team. We have such a large media market here. We draw from Alaska, from Canada, from throughout, the West Coast. We have a proven top tier professional sports culture here that is fan focused, right? All of our professional teams, Super Bowl champions.
That's right.
Right? We have American League West championship Mariners and our Kraken team. So all of these, as well as the Storm, 4 WNBA championships, and the Sounders with their MLS Cups. I mean, it just goes on and on with so many wonderful sports organizations. So we feel a deep responsibility to help support it and the opportunity that's coming along the way.
From your lips to league owners' ears, Mary. Let's get it. Okay, our last question is, what are you no longer doing in a good way? We're leaving it behind. We're not doing it anymore.
Okay, so I just did it this morning because I just no, it's so funny because I've had to realize that I have to add more time for getting from one place to another. And so, usually what took me 20 minutes is like an hour and a half, right? Coming down I-5 to get here. Oh. But I realized it's better to be early than to be late. So
I wouldn't have pegged you. I feel like for banking, for some reason, it feels very like on time kind of profession. So, okay.
So I do that. And then
bankers, they're just like us.
So the other thing is to really embrace that we are in an environment of constant change, that it's not about how it used to be done, which was kind of usually the fallback, but it's expecting and understanding that we live in an environment where the mindset is we're moving forward. And that means innovation, it means new ways of doing things, and it means progress. So both from a personal and a professional leadership perspective, I am a person that is very optimistic, and I'm a half full kind of person. But I, just like stuff happens and you have no idea, bad, tragic things, how do you get through it all? And so you have to really think about the perspective. This year is better than last year. There's definitely progress. The things that we have access to and are very simple for us now to use, are different than the way it was before. So it just helps you realize and gives you perspective on the progress that has occurred and keep thinking about moving forward. And so for me, being positive is a choice, trying to ensure that every time, everything that I do is, focused on, first of all, it could have been worse, right? That's always a good but feeling resilient, and it helps me feel like I'm empowered and am in control of something that I can make sure that I'm conscious about, enjoy the ride, have fun along the way, and just realize that change is happening so fast. You don't even realize it is, but it's a part of who we all are in life. So
change is inevitable. Progress is being made, and give yourself another 10 minutes that you think you need to drive. These are really good lessons, Mary.
Or 30 minutes.
Or 30 minutes. Thank you so much for sitting down with me and for hosting me here in this beautiful office. If you're listening and you need some banking or your business, I highly recommend Mary and her team at Wells Fargo. So yes, thank you again for taking the time.
Thank you, Rachel. Really enjoyed it.
This has been The Weekly, with production assistance from Nick Patry. If you liked what you heard, rate us and write a review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. We love listener feedback, so if you have any story suggestions, comments, or complaints, email us at info@theweeklyseattle.com. Make sure to check back next Sunday for the latest local business news. We'll see you next time.